Feeling a little bit too late getting my program out.
Hi everyone. Okay, so I'd like to welcome you to our first Diversity and Inclusion Network of WA in-person event. My name, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Hannah Boschman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Audio describing myself, I have very bright clothes on, always. Glasses and Afro-Caribbean hair. I'd like to welcome all our participants today, those of you that have made the journey here to come and be here in person, thank you. And also those online. So I'll just kick off with a little bit of housekeeping before we launch into the proceedings. So obviously, if you're in person, if you could keep your mobile on silent. In the unlikely event of an emergency, our muster point is out there, and the doors out there, doors here are the exit. This session is being filmed, we wanted to give everybody an opportunity from an accessibility point of view to be able to access the information. So if you don't want to be filmed, please let someone know now we will accommodate that request. This is a hybrid event. Hybrid events are fraught with technical issues, so bear with us if we do have any of those. So I'll just get to the next slide. Yes, okay. So I'd like to start off with an acknowledgement of country. Nala Kadich Nunamot, Kan Kadich Nijapuja. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are. And I'd like to acknowledge the elders, past and present, and the continuing connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to country. And I'd like to thank you for the privilege today of presenting on our country. Oops. Okay, I would also like to just say that at Anglicare WA we have an Aboriginal engagement team who do fantastic work. And the Aboriginal engagement team unfortunately aren't able to be with us today because they are on country in Kalgoorlie at a meeting of Aboriginal RAAG. And so Jasmine Gregory, who's a Budgetgitja woman with family's ties to the Kimberley and the Midwest, has very kindly done a video for us. So I'd like to introduce Jasmine.
I'm the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Engagement Lead of Anglicare WA, and my role involves supporting and mentoring Aboriginal staff and also supporting the coordination and implementation of our Stretch RAP. I wish to acknowledge Whadjuk people on whose land I now live and work on, and I wish to respectfully acknowledge the elders, both past and present. I am one of 3 members of the Anglicare WA engagement team, and my colleagues are Leonie Cotton-Williams, our Director, and Jared Wall, our GM of Aboriginal Service Strategy. We are sad that we cannot be here in person today with you all, but have to attend an Aboriginal Advisory Group meeting out of town. We would like to share that Aboriginal engagement team works alongside Anna, our Diversity and Inclusion Lead, in an effort to support equality and inclusion. This is done in an effort to protect and support all marginalised and all vulnerable individual groups. We feel that creating a workplace that is inclusive, respectful and safe for all enhances workplace culture across the organisation and will help us to achieve our vision and purpose, which is to remove the barriers to thrive. Again, we wish you all the best with today's session. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Jasmine and the Aboriginal engagement team for their support. Now I'd like to welcome Jill, my partner in crime with DINWA, and who tell you a little bit about DINWA.
Hi everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Jill Brazil from Ireland. Okay, remember that. Oxymoron. So how did DINWA come about? Well, Anna and I just had this brainwave one day. Would you call it a brainwave? We were actually at the Diversity and Inclusion Summit here in Perth, which is run by Tanya Finney, and Tanya is in our audience today. We're very grateful for your attendance. And from the environment at that conference, at that summit, we just got this understanding that there's an appetite out there for people talking about diversity and inclusion. And not even just one aspect of it, the whole umbrella of everything diversity and inclusion. And people started talking to us, and we're talking about how can we get together, about sharing ideas, and even just networking and knowing that you are not alone when you may be facing that DE&I burnout. There's a lot of people on the same journey. So we thought, how do we start? It's a small little network post. I think we probably spent a day designing our logo as well. And then we thought, what do we call it? And it just worked out well, DINWA, Diversity and Inclusion Network WA. And then from there we thought, okay, we'll just start small, we'll start a LinkedIn group, which was Anna and I. Great. Now we have over 300 members on our LinkedIn group, and we started this last September. And we have members not just from Perth, we have Victoria, we even have overseas members. I saw somebody from Canada, there's somebody from France. Our reach is gone bigger and much more global than we ever thought. Well, we were hoping to reach Perth, not globally. So where are we going from here? We're hoping to foster this connection for everybody in every sector, so we can get together and just talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and any part of that whole program that interests you. We're going to work towards having an online quarterly meeting and hopefully an in-person quarterly event at the same time. The feedback we've got from our LinkedIn members is everybody loves this networking in person. So we're working on that. First step, we need to get through these technology things from today. But what I would encourage everybody, share the network on LinkedIn, and feel free to contact people on the network, contact us, because we love to hear what's happening. And if you are one of our members and you would like to actually present at one of our events or share what you're doing in your organisation or partner with somebody else to show, so long as it has anything to do with DE&I and it's appropriate, you're welcome to contact us, and we will see how we can work it into our next programs. But we're just here about networking, getting to know people, and hopefully sharing resources that you need. When you go to write a policy or something, you may already have a contact who has written a policy who may be able to and willing to share it with you. From this, I think that's everything covered. Yeah, okay, so that's everything from me. Please follow us on LinkedIn, and please keep engaged. The more impact we can have and reach out and even get people talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, that's even the first start, just to talk about it, and then we can build on that knowledge between ourselves here. Thank you for coming. We're so delighted. I was looking at the door asking Kath to go and grab some randoms, hoping to fill the room. But yeah, it's filling nicely, and thanks very much for supporting us. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so forgive me. I'm on my mobile doing these notes. So thank you, Jill, for that introduction of DINWA. And so I'm really going to be talking to you next about our major supporter. And obviously I work for Anglicare WA, so I'm a little bit biased, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing at Anglicare, because I started about a year ago, just over a year ago, in the D&I role, and my role covers quite a broad range of diversity and inclusion areas. So I work on cultural diversity, disability access and inclusion, Rainbow Network, which is LGBTQIA+, and also I'm involved in the Well at Work program, which is around workplace mental health and wellbeing. So I wanted to sort of just acknowledge that Anglicare is a massive organisation. We have over 700 staff. We've got many locations across WA, lots of different services, everything from parenting services to domestic violence, homelessness, and some really quite difficult, challenging things that we deal with in our work. And obviously you'll all know about the housing crisis that's happening at the moment and the rise in homelessness across WA. So I actually invited our philanthropy team to come today because they've got their winter appeal happening, and we need support more than ever. And really, Anglicare runs on, state and federal funding and most importantly donations. So we really encourage you to have a chat with the philanthropy team, can't say it, and have a chat with them about the wonderful work that they're doing. So DNI Anglicare really runs on the support of our staff. So I just wanted to show you some photos of the things that we do. So we have 4 working groups that work within that space, and obviously we have our Aboriginal engagement team as well, who I like to say we walk alongside. We work collaboratively where possible, and I think intersectionality is something that's really an emerging area, and hopefully we can see that with the number of people that are interested in DINWA, the intersectional approach is really something that I think we can all benefit from. So our working groups do all sorts of things. They have your traditional morning teas, but they also do some amazing other types of work around advocacy and support, and really supporting staff who are diverse as well. My role sits within the P&C team, so we talk about a culture of inclusion at Anglicare, and one of our values is being fiercely inclusive. We know that our staff are really, really believe in that value, and I think it's just fantastic to see people put that value into action. So you'll see our Pride float. We do a Pride float in November. We had International Day of People with Disability in Rockingham, had some amazing speakers there. We've got our Reconciliation WA event that, staff come even if they're not actually working that day. We'll come and support the Aboriginal engagement team. So yeah, it's a fantastic place to work. Like I said, I'm a bit biased. So I'm going to introduce my boss, wonderful human that she is. Catherine Lafurla is our Director of People and Culture, and I wanted to give Kath an opportunity to talk about the importance of leadership in the D&I space.
Thank you. When Anna said I was talking about leadership in the D&I space and you would all be here, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. So I'm going to try and give you a bit of a personal perspective on leadership in the D&I space. I started out my career in the surfing industry of all places, but then quickly moved, as many West Aussies do, into mining and construction. I worked for an Aboriginal corporation in the Pilbara. I then went and worked in Darwin, worked for a disability organisation in WA, and now Anglicare. And in that time I've seen so many different approaches to diversity and inclusion, and driven from so many different directions. So what I wanted to reflect on is that leadership can come in all shapes and forms. So I've seen leadership in terms of mining contracts, which, the principle compels you to have 50% Aboriginal engagement. I had one of those with a non-conformance letter on, when I started my new job, and we need to get to 50%. So that's one way to lead and drive diversity. The other thing that I've seen is diversity that's been driven from the bottom up. So it's been driven from employees who feel passionate about inclusion in the workplace. A good example of that was when I was working in Darwin. I was on the RED&I awards panel, and there was this tiny little organisation. I mean, we saw all these wonderful big employers who had all the resources in the world, who did wonderful women in leadership programs, etc. But we saw this little brewery in, I think it was Victoria, not many people, maybe 50, 80 staff, and it was one employee who started a rainbow committee and then got a little bit of momentum. Next minute, a couple more employees, and they held their first event, blokey bloke workplace that it was, a few people came along, but they created a real shift in culture, and then the executive got involved, and it became such a really wonderful place to work for people with that, who identified as part of the Rainbow Committee. So I thought that was wonderful because they did it on the smell of an ollie rag, and it was employee driven. The other thing that I've seen is obviously through internal leadership. So Anglicare WA is very passionate about inclusion and diversity. Our CEO, our board, our executive, we're all committed to driving change. We have KPIs, but that's not what we're all about. We're all about making sure we're doing it for the right reasons, and we're doing it in the right sort of place-based way. So from the top of WA, we're focusing on making sure we're including people from the local community, we're including Aboriginal people in Perth, and is really passionate about making sure we give refugees and asylum seekers an opportunity who might otherwise have barriers to employment. But in chatting to you today and then listening to the introduction, I've missed one out. So it's actually community and sector level leadership. So people like Tim, people like Anna and Jill, wherever she's gone, there she is, who are actually making a difference in the broader community in the sector. So what an important role you both play. And Tim, can't wait to hear what you've got to say, because you're going to change our thinking, I'm sure. But I think that's enough from me, because most importantly we want to hear what Tim's got to say. But thank you. Is that all right? I forgot. Oh no, I've got to introduce Tim. Hang on a minute. Excuse me, I've been given a script. So I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Tim Muirhead. Tim has a long and illustrious career working in and has written about community development for over 30 years. His work has been focused particularly on how we develop the human spirit in each of us and all of us, and how we ensure that our diversity enriches us rather than divides us. Tim's work has been particularly focused on Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal relations, and today he's going to draw on that work to explore the wider questions of dominant culture and diversity. In his words, his work is built around a strong framework of developing spirit. Tim's authored 2 books, Weaving Tapestries, The New Handbook for Building Communities, and Finding Haran. An allegory that explores how we share our truths courageously. And truth-telling is something we talk about a lot at Anglicare WA, so that's super relevant to us. How we share our truths courageously without silencing the truths of others. We're super excited to have Tim with us today to help us begin to unpack the concepts, language and theory behind dominant culture in a modern Australian context, where multiculturalism and political polarisation intersect. Thank you so much, Tim, for your time. It's really great to have you.
Hi, I'm Tim Muirhead. I'm very, very grateful to live on Wajak here in Noongar country. And feeling a bit of pressure here, because a lot of the talks I've done in the past have become almost formulaic, because there's stuff I've kind of worked out over the years, and I like to talk about that. And today it's going to be just a little bit different, because I've been yarning a little bit to people about this concept of dominant culture and where I fit and all that and so on. And suddenly I get invited to do a talk on that. Is this good if I stand here? Or do you want me to stand back here?
It's online.
Yeah, okay. And hello, screen people. A lot of the work here is going to arise, a lot of what I'm talking about today arises from my work in the space of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal relations. I started working in that space in... Oh, sorry. I keep going. I started working in that space in 1997, and a lot of this arises from a realisation I had very, very early on. I thought that when I started working in reconciliation, which was my job, the coordinator, along with Uncle Fred Collard, co-coordinator of reconciliation in WA, I thought that my main task would be to learn about Aboriginal culture. And very, very, very quickly I realised actually what I need to learn about is my own culture, because it's that culture that is getting in the way of us working effectively together. And that was probably a bit fast-tracked. You just keep yelling at me if I... that was probably a bit fast-tracked by those of us of a certain age remember with discomfort John Howard refusing to say sorry when it was so evident and clear that part of the healing process from the horror of the stolen generations was a government apology. It just took 11 years to do that. But I did genuinely think, what is going on in a culture that where sorry becomes a political and scary word? It didn't make sense to me. And so I started thinking about, and then of course, what is my culture? Because I am dominant culture in like I'm a perfect storm of dominant, right? I had to list it here. Oh, that's nice. Okay. Yeah, so I'm dominant culture in almost everywhere. I'm male, I'm straight, I'm cisgendered, I'm typically abled, I'm Australian born. What else have we got? Neurotypical, English speaking. I'm very, very, very dominant culture. And I've been struck by what does that mean for us? What is our place in this increasingly diverse world? In this increasingly diverse world. And that's what I want to reflect on. Obviously that has been primarily for me in relation to Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal stuff. I've done some work with Dr. Jennifer DeVries as well around gender. But I want to broaden out some of the observations I've made about this the place of dominant culture in a diverse world. So, and you have to, my slides are dreadful, okay? Like that, don't hire me to do graphic arts and formatting. So it's sort of entitled A Note from a Dominant Culture. The first thing I want to talk about is sort of a vision I guess I have for how our workplaces, our communities and so on should be. And you know, my background is in community development. As was mentioned by Kath, I've had a passion for years that in all of our work, what we should be aiming to do is to develop spirit in each other and develop spirit in ourselves. And the reason I use that term, I looked up the word spirit when I was early on in community development. And as you're probably aware, the word spirit means the breath of life. The breath of life. And for me, the reason I talk about developing spirit, or literally unwrapping spirit within each of us, if we can fully breathe, then we can really live our lives well. If we can't fully breathe, we're a bit like a person drowning. You know, we lash out at other people. We're always looking for ways of getting our head above water. But if we can really fully breathe our lives, then we can do all sorts of things as human beings. And so what do we need to do with and for each other to develop spirit? And the answer I was given years ago by a bloke called David Nourish, he gave me this sort of throwaway line for him, but it sort of changed my view. The key task is to pay attention. If you really, really pay attention to me, I can start to feel the fullness of myself emerging, coming out, being given permission to be heard. How do you choke spirit? Well, you ignore, or you ridicule, or you disallow who I am. You ignore, or you ridicule, or you disallow who I want to be. And for me, my sort of vision, if you like, for our workplaces, our communities, our nation, is that all of us can be fully who we are and know that we belong. That for me, and it's a funny thing for me to talk about, but for me, the definition of cultural safety, the definition of cultural security, if you like, is that I can be fully who I am and be welcomed and belong in a place. I can't tell you how easy that is for me, because I'm dominant culture. Everybody's familiar, right? But it's not easy for people in minority culture. It's not easy for all sorts of people. And we need to get very, very clear of what it's going to take to ensure that all of us can genuinely feel like we belong. So I want to now move on, though, to a challenge that sort of got me thinking about this whole thing of dominant culture. The challenge is, in my years, I have seen a lot of legislative victories, of policy victories, that have ensured more and more and more inclusivity on paper. And yet I witness and hear about a lot of discomfort for a lot of people. And so the question becomes, well, what is going on that we're not following up that legislative and policy work with genuine human interpersonal comfort? What's happening in our culture and what's happening between us? And I want to talk about that a little bit. So yeah, what do we need to do to start changing that? When I was first working in the Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal world, in reconciliation world, I kind of thought if I just wagged my finger at people and say, don't be racist and be a good person like me, that will fix it all up. Turns out it didn't, right? Because actually there's all sorts of underlying dynamics that if we don't understand those underlying dynamics, we're not really going to be able to dig out the changes that need to occur. So I do want to talk about some of those underlying dynamics. So firstly, I think we shouldn't get tripped up. We shouldn't get surprised that in Australia we're not real good at this diversity. I genuinely think we're getting better, but until I was approaching adulthood, we were living in a nation literally designed as monocultural. I think it's really, really important for us to understand this and to understand how this has deeply embedded itself into our attitudes, our assumptions, our policies, our institutions and so on and so forth. We are deeply monocultural. Like, when I say designed as, 1901, first Act of Parliament, we enacted the White Australia policy. We are going to be a white nation, a monocultural nation. And then all the other stuff of, androcentricity and so on, there's sort of a patriarchal nation and so on. I just want to talk about a few of the impacts that those monocultural policies had, as quickly as I can. I think I'm going right for time. What that meant for Aboriginal people, that meant that genocidal policies and policies of trying to, I'm going to use it, a lot of what I'm going to say here is quite offensive, because it was deeply offensive. Absorption. Our policies towards Aboriginal people were either genocidal, well, both of these are genocidal, or absorbing into whiteness by removal of children, by controlled marriages, and by cultural insistence on acting white. You could only get rights if you acted white. I mustn't go on about that because that's, I'm fascinated by our history in that area. People of colour, on the other hand, people of colour who were born overseas, the policies there were ones of exclusion. People just weren't allowed in. In my view, this is a bit of an aside, but in my view, the dominant cultural racism towards Aboriginal people is actually a bit different to the dominant cultural racism towards other people of colour, because we've inherited this idea that Aboriginal people, if they're like us, they're right. Whereas the intergenerational racism towards other people of colour was, they shouldn't be coming here. It just leads to differences. If we understand those differences, we can dig it out in ourselves. And can I say all the way through this, partly what I know about racism, etc., I can feel it in myself. I'd love to say I can't, And I'm not going to give you all the examples because it's just too embarrassing. But we often, I think we need to dig out and understand the intergenerational impact of these things on ourselves. Anyway, people with perceived disabilities. Because we're a monocultural nation, we'll institutionalise people with perceived disabilities. Because we're a monocultural nation and a patriarchal nation, women were subject to exclusion. They were controlled through not having access to certain power structures, etc. My mother had to leave work when she got married. My mother's life was enriched and saved by feminism, really, because she had no power in her life. That was just part of our culture. And I'm not doing this to make, I want to do the opposite. I'm not trying to make us feel bad as Australians. I'm trying to say, this is where we've come from, so what does that mean for how we start to turn it? Obviously non-heterosexual people were pronounced and legislated as insane or illegal, and then transgender and non-binary people, we kind of pretend they didn't exist, really, except as entertainers occasionally. So these were all ways in which the monoculture really choked the spirit of a lot of people in this country. And it's awful and cruel. But I'll tell you what else it did. It started to dominate our thinking. It created a sense of, I'll say white for simplicity's sake, white superiority, white rightness. And that wasn't always malicious. Very, very, very good people, well-meaning people, would bring in attitudes of, I'm the saviour, I'm the missionary, I'm the rescuer. But this deep sense of what is right. So, I just need to check where I'm up to. Yeah, so just to give some examples of how the... Hello again, sorry. To give some examples of the sort of hangovers of those policies. And these are very, very arguable. Feel free to challenge me when we get down to questions or whatever. Often we carry an attitude of assuming that we all experience things in the same way. And that's between different personalities and all sorts of stuff. But if we start to build policies or if we start to build our interactions in the workplace on an assumption that we all see the world the same. I mean, a very common thing is, you know all this, I treat everyone the same. Now, a lot of people do see that as the end game. And of course, the trouble is with that, we're not the same. I mean, that is bleeding obvious. And yet, a lot of our entrenched assumptions get built like that. One of the things I've noticed is sometimes we want to make sameness the objective of inclusion. Oh, we're all the same, we're all the same. Let's all be the same. And that sort of completely diminishes the richness of our human diversity. I'm a wannabe Canadian, my wife's Canadian, I like Canada. But the Canadians sort of contrast themselves with the USA, where the USA tends to have a melting pot approach, they say. The Canadians always think they're better than the USA, but rather than a mosaic. And I think we sometimes, particularly in dominant culture, have a sense that inclusion means the melting pot, or even inclusion means the solvent, in the same way that the chief protectors used to see Aboriginal people as being absorbed into whiteness. A common one, I think, is sort of wanting to pretend that we are not racist or ethnocentric. I like to normalise it, really. I think ethnocentricity, that idea that my way of seeing the world is the way of seeing the world, is a natural human thing. The damage is not done by me being ethnocentric. The damage is done if I am not aware of that. Because if I'm not aware of that, I look at something different and go, oh, that's just wrong, rather than, there's something here I don't yet understand, right? So we get all shaky at the idea that we might be racist or we might be ethnocentric, rather than challenging ourselves to that, because it's bad people who are racist, it's bad people who are ethnocentric. And I better race on. And then, I just wanted to say a few well-meaning attitudes in dominant culture. I've probably covered a couple of these. Assimilation, I'll help you be like me. That people of goodwill can take and go there, I'm going to help you be like me. People of goodwill. The woman, her name's Meredith Green. If any of you know her, thank her for me, because she changed my thinking on a lot of this and deeply confronted me when I was first working reconciliation. She talked to a lot of people involved in reconciliation. She said the dominant position of white people involved in reconciliation is the missionary position. It's a great statement, and the more you think about that statement, the more you think, yeah, that's perfect. And I was deeply confronted because I thought, oh, am I in this game because it's no longer fashionable to be a missionary? And that obviously that leads to disempowerment and so on. The great white hero, I'll lead you to success. I'm going to lead the Aboriginal people to success. I'll lead other people to success. Or this one I think can be damaging, the sort of, oh, poor you, wanting to dwell in the hurt of people. It's not my hurt, but I might want to dwell in your hurt, feel sorry for you, rather than admiring of the strength and resilience and the courage that has allowed people to survive the horror of what has gone on in the last 100 years. So, I will go on from there. There's one more point, but I'm just going to go on. I want to now talk about what does it look like to better equip DCs. I've given us an acronym, the dominant culture people. Because I think we need to get beyond the should. The should sometimes matters. There are certain words that really cannot happen. We need to actually put in guidelines around all that, okay, so as not to do too much damage. But we need to actually equip people to change their entrenched assumptions and attitudes. Importantly, and I think some of our training moves in the wrong direction with this, we often think, right, we need cultural awareness training, meaning we are learning about other cultures. I think that needs to be almost preceded by self-awareness. Self of me and self of my culture, including the intergenerational culture that I have sprung from. Obviously that's different for everybody else. I'm talking about a white dominant culture Australian for me. We need to create the right mix of challenge and safety. I've done a lot of work with Aboriginal colleagues around this training in improving Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal relations. And what I've noticed is that the key is to get people to come out of their trenches, out of their comfort zones. Two ways of keeping people in their trenches. One, don't challenge them. Oh yeah, no, you're good. That's lovely, well done. You're trying, good on you. That will not get people out of their trenches. The other way, throw rocks at them. That will make people hide and not engage in the conversation. So we've got to actually work out how do we have this dialogue in a way that draws people out of their trenches. Enable a shared understanding of history and culture. Truth-telling matters so much. And I'm talking about this in the Aboriginal space, but I think it matters in all space. The more we understand the truth, the more we understand the history, the more we understand what people with disability have gone through, the more we understand what gay and lesbian people have gone through, the more we come into a real conversation about what a healthy world looks like today. Understanding the root causes of discrimination and how to address them. I just want to show this. I don't know if this will make sense to you, but years ago I sort of thought about what are the sources of racism. I'll use the term racism, but I think this is true of a lot of sources of discrimination. And then what's the solution? So you can have racism or discrimination based on ignorance. You know, people who did not know about the stolen generations were not really contributing well to the healing process of that. What's the solution to that? Information, truth-telling. But then also there's the racism of woundedness. People who've really suffered trauma themselves might not have the patience or the resilience to engage with the stories of trauma for other people. And for me, the solution that I've witnessed to woundedness is deep listening. A couple of elders who I could name to you when they got, because this is where some of the malicious racism comes from. People have been quite traumatised themselves. I've heard elders just say, now tell me your story. And very often people have had a horror story, terrible abuse as kids and so on and so forth. White supremacy, I'm less certain about this one, but where you do have this intergenerational idea that we are the best culture, we are the best race, lived experience, you can do role plays that affect this, but I think hearing human beings' story, and you've got to be careful that the human being telling the story has the resilience to do it safely. But that starts to turn people a little bit, and they think, oh, it's not because they're black. They are actually a human being, and it changes the supremacy. Then there's also racism against a stranger. So we've had racism towards people we don't know. Obviously, the solution to that is relationship. And then there's racism against the enemy. And that's what we've had a long time in Australia. We literally were enemies over land. We were enemies over children. Doesn't matter how you that we dispossess Aboriginal people. That went to a place of enmity. The only way past that is genuine reconciliation. The work of building trust after we've done wrong to each other, after conflict, after enmity. So my summary of what we need to do is we need to have all of those happening if we're going to really address, if we're going to really change attitudes in the dominant culture, because all of those exist. I said this already, really. Connecting with the lived experience of others is really crucial. Role plays, personal stories. I think white guilt, this is a funny thing for me to say, but I do think white guilt can get in the way of a good, resilient conversation. My own view is move from guilt to responsibility. What is it I can do to make good on the damage that my mob have done? I'll say a radical statement. I'm a proud white Australian. As a proud white Australian, I need to look in the eye. What have we done that has caused damage? And what can we do to start to turn that around? So try and move from guilt. And to some extent, that's why I got involved in this game, because I wanted to stop bursting into tears every time I saw a story about Aboriginal people on the telly. What can I do about it is a better question. Be constructive in managing cross-cultural competence. So this is a very simple diagram that Kim Bridge and I latched onto. You've probably seen it. It's about competence. I have to race through it. There's conscious and unconscious competence, and there's effectiveness and ineffectiveness. People who have never worked in this space say, I'll stick to Aboriginal space because it's what I know, but it could be any areas of diversity, are unconsciously incompetent. They don't know that they don't know. It's not they don't know what they don't know that they don't know. They can do great damage. They can do great damage because often those same people think they know the answer. And they can have worked in the space for 30 years, still thinking they know the answer, and if people would just listen, then they would fix it up. You need to move as quickly as possible to conscious incompetence. I know that I don't know. Now, people here will be walking on eggshells a bit, but it's a really much, much better space than believing that you know what another person's world looks like. And then you learn and you keep trying, you keep learning, and you actually become good at working cross-culturally, but you're thinking about it. And then the space you want to get to, and why we need a lot more, say, Aboriginal people, gay and lesbian people, neurodiverse people in the space, is unconscious competence. We just do it second nature. Right? The importance of that, and this is a very long conversation, if I'm working with an organisation, I'll say, firstly I'll say, I spent most of my life in Noongar country down here, and I played a useful role. It's people down here can actually be very valuable. But if you're a manager and you know that somebody is unconsciously incompetent, you keep them out of the space because they're doing damage for everybody. And then, yeah, that's all I'll say about that. And then I will finish up in a second, because the last thing I want to say is make sure that you're doing your own work and not doing the work of other people. It goes back to that sort of great white hero thing. I don't know if this will make sense to you, but this is something that basically came up from Kim Bridge. Kim Bridge, the Gidger bloke. And he and I used to have all these arguments about what needs to happen. He'd sort of say, forget about history, Tim, forget about history, we've got to get forward. And I'd say, yeah, but how do people forget about history if white fellas don't actually understand and acknowledge that? So Kim would say, we've got to move beyond the impacts of that history. I would say, yeah, and it's really hard to do that if people around you are not doing our work, the white work, the non-Aboriginal work, of understanding and acknowledging those impacts. I'm not going to do the rest, but the point of this is sometimes we think it's our job to do, in this example, the Aboriginal work. I'm talking about Roger, being Roger. Actually, our job is to do the non-Aboriginal work. We have a role to play. We absolutely have a role to play. Just be clear on what that role is. And you can't really be clear on that unless you're working in partnership with the person of that group, in this case, Aboriginal people. I think that's all I will say. I think that's where my notes end. So I hope that made some sort of sense to you. We're out of time, but I would love to be challenged, questioned, any thoughts, inspirations, whatever that you have, and we can do that afterwards.
We do have time for 2 or 3 questions.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Are there any questions?
I have a question. You talked about how we are a monocultural society. Given that the present day Australia, we've got something like 30% of people born overseas, and I think half of us have parents born overseas. At what point do we cease being
No.
a
Yeah.
multi?
So I'll just repeat your question for the people on the screen. I said we are a monocultural society. That's not exactly what I said. I said we were designed as a monocultural nation originally. That actually changed in 73 or 74 or 75, I can't remember, 75 I think, where they actually brought in policies of multiculturalism. We all sort of, what's that? I think we are a multicultural nation now. I know a lot of people would say, no, you're not really, you want us all to just be like you. But I think we really should name that we are a multicultural nation, that we are a diverse place. What I'm talking about is the lingering impacts of 3 generations that believed that Australia was a monocultural place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, thank you. But I've got a question that kind of leads on to that.
Is that all right?
Is that all right?
Yeah.
So you also said that it's important to, maybe before we focus on cultural awareness, to have cultural self-understanding. How do we effectively do that, given that at least a third of us don't have the culture that is the Australian culture because we come from overseas?
Oh, well, no, I think I need to understand what are the influences on me. Yours will be different on you. I think that my part in all this, and it's only my part, is to actually look at what has created some of the attitudes that bring Australia down today. So it's all I'm saying there is, like, we tend to think about cross-culturalism as sort of studying the exotic other, if you like. And actually I think it's really what is stopping me really being able to hear this person in front of me talking. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if that was very articulate, but one thing I didn't name there was I do think sometimes we tend to think that there is going to be one way of working with any group or whatever. And I think for me, I want to, the 2 things that get in the way of me, so I'm going to stick with the example I know. I meet an Aboriginal person. I need to pay attention to that person. two things can stop me seeing that person. One is if I ignore Aboriginality as a factor that might play out in their world. The other is if I define them by that. Especially if I'm defining them by my stereotype of Aboriginal. That was the strategy in the referendum of showing a lot of dysfunction, for the no campaign, show a lot of dysfunction, because that gets into people's heads that that's what Aboriginal means. Do you know what I mean? So I think for me, the whole conversation needs to be about individual to individual. But don't just think, I'm the norm, how do I get to know the exotic other? Think, what is it in me that can make a difference to the diversity we live in? And that's it, I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And Tim, just on behalf of DINWA, we would like to present you with a small gift.
Thank you very much.
A bit of bedtime reading. Now, I would like to introduce one of our guests tonight, Dr. Tanya Finney. It's all right.
Keep going.
We'll keep going, okay. Tanya, would you like to come and give a quick run through of what we're likely to expect at the next Diversity and Inclusion Summit? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Very quickly, founder of the Diversity and Inclusion Summit, and a little bit of a backstory maybe to it. I've been working in the diversity and inclusion space for quite some time. I was really lucky in having grown up really nomadic, and I ultimately did all my studies and finally my PhD in cultural leadership because I'm honestly so passionate about that space. And for us, the conference or the summit is really about ultimately making a difference, having something practical that you can take from the conference and go and introduce immediately. Because so often we hear all these academic stories, and academia is incredibly important, don't get me wrong, but it gets lost in the policies that Tim has mentioned, all those dusty documents that sits in folders. And how many of us have some great diversity and inclusion policies in our workplaces, but how many of us actually do everything that's in those policies, right? And the conference was really to be something about where awareness can meet action. So people who come there already probably have some level of awareness, otherwise I imagine they won't sign up for it. They may be curious. But there's some really rich conversations, honestly, some of the best cultural conversations, and I'm so proud of these two women who has grown DINWA as well as inspiration out of the summit, and there's some very cool stuff that's come directly from the summit. Quick snapshot is two of my favourite things this year coming up at the summit. We have one day in Perth and one day in Melbourne, completely different, so you could in theory come to both. Is we have a neurodiversity panel simply because we haven't covered that intersectionality in the past, and it's quite an extensive panel that include people who has had late diagnoses, clinical psychologists, as well as lawyers that's sitting on the panel, so a really deep discussion. I'm a redhead, 1.8% of the population is redheads. There's 4 times more likely to be somebody neurodiverse in this room than a redhead. So look around you, right? We don't walk around with labels when you're neurodiverse. We do walk around with labels when you're redheads. So that's one topic. The other thing is going to be, we have this year something really fun. I'm super excited about it. It's called the Inclusion Innovation Showdown. And it's going to be a couple of businesses who's going to present a 10-minute spiel on an innovation concept that they have introduced in their workplace. So here's what we've done, here's a great idea that you can take out of the room, and then there'll be Mentimeter interaction with people that gets an opportunity to get involved, vote for their favourite, ask questions, so that you can learn from those and take it away. So yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you, Tanya. And I would just like one more round of applause for Tim. Tim, that was amazing. It was really thought-provoking, and thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you very much. And I would also like to thank Anglicare for supporting us today and supporting us since our startup. It's been amazing. Thanks very much. And especially thank everybody here for coming today and everybody who's joined us online. I think we got away without any tech issues, which is amazing. And yes, be sure and follow us on. There's our QR code. The next one. Next one. No, it's all right. You all know where to find us. We're all on LinkedIn, and you've obviously all found us if you're here already. So thank you very much for coming. We're going to hang around for a bit now. Help yourselves to tea, coffee, some cakes. And Tim, are you going to hang around for a cup of tea? And I'm sure you're going to be bombarded with more questions. And thank you again for everybody, and safe driving home. Thank you, and thank you for joining us.